Alyssa? Can you hear me? Alyssa! What the hell?
All right, welcome everyone to another panel for the Milwaukee Short Film Festival. This panel is called Today's Horror Genre, and I'm being joined by a panel of filmmakers who all have films in this year's Short Film Festival. I'll give you guys a brief rundown of myself. I am your moderator for this panel. My name is Michael Viers. For the last 8 years, I've been doing a critical analysis podcast called The Shame List Picture Show. On top of that, I'm also a filmmaker myself who is no stranger to the horror genre. Ross has actually played a couple of my films in the past, and it's my goal with this panel to have a great discussion about the horror genre and see where this goes. How are y'all doing tonight?
Doing great. Good. Thank you.
All right. So what I want to do is I want to go through I want the panel to introduce themselves. So once again, if you can give me your name, the name of your film, and let's shake it up a little bit where you're located.
Awesome. So hi, I'm Cassie Llanas, and my film is called Lost Boys Pizza. That's going to be premiering at the Milwaukee Film Fest. And where am I located in Chicago? I remember where I live. There we go.
Do you mind if I call you Cassie, or do you prefer Cassianis?
Oh, Cassie's great.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, I'm Corey Benson Powers. I wrote and directed a film named Locksmith that's playing at the Milwaukee Shorts Fest on Sunday. And I'm located in Chicago.
And then
There's me. I'm Vanna, just short for Savanna, and I directed Lurker. I reside in Chicago.
and Vanna's film will be playing on Saturday, September 7th for the film festival. So once again, we have Cassie, whose film Lost Boys Pizza will be playing Saturday, September 7th at 7 p.m. We have Corey Benson Powers, whose film Locksmith will be Sunday, September 8th. And Vanna, her film Lurker will be Saturday, September 7th. So the question I want to start off with, because interesting thing happened this year at the film festival. Me and Ross were talking. He has been doing this festival for how many years, Ross?
30
years. And Ross has always been a supporter of many different types of film and has always been very good about having a nice selection of genres. But he told me that this year he has received more horror films than any previous years. So I want to kind of get to the bottom of that. So what I want to ask you first, each one of you, is what is your relationship to the horror genre? We're going to start with you, Cassie, if you don't mind.
Okay. My relationship with the horror genre, I'm the youngest of 7 kids, and so there's a lot of us, and my older siblings, of course, were teenagers and always wanted to watch freaky things, and me being a 6-year-old would want to hang out with my older siblings and would also get terrified out of my brain at the things that they would watch, which included like Scream and Night of the Living Dead. And so I was traumatized at a very young age. And so I like to call my relationship to horror kind of Stockholm-esque, where I was surrounded by it so much that the fear and hatred kind of grew into, oh my God, I love it. And there's an obsession where I like need to get more of it. And I kind of start daring myself to watch horror films like as I became a teenager and be like, okay, I can watch this by myself. And like it would be the new Dawn of the Dead remake, and then freak out and turn the channel, but then go back and stuff like that. So since then, I've become a complete horror nerd, and I love hosting horror movie screenings with friends, and basically if anyone comes over, I scare the pants off of them with horror movies.
And how about yourself, Corey? What is your relationship to this genre?
So I probably got introduced to it a bit too young in watching The Shining and The Exorcist at a very young age. And then from there, as well as reading a lot of Stephen King books before I was probably old enough to read them, is my thing was that the horror genre always stuck with me after the fact. And I'd be thinking about it and talking with my friends, or, that'd be we talked about at school. Did you see this movie? It was so scary. And, from there, it's always been something I've been interested in as, an audience member myself. And then as I grew into filmmaking, like that drove me into being a filmmaker myself, because the way that a scary movie would resonate with me after the fact, I wanted to learn how to create that myself and instill that fear into other people.
And how about yourself, Vanna?
Yeah, similar to their upbringing, I also probably watched things that I should not have. My dad always put on a lot of like great 80s films, so like a lot of action films, like RoboCop and whatever Sylvester Stallone was in. But Alien was also a part of that rotation of films. And, I feel like as a kid, I always watched dramas and these action films, and I was like, why don't they just communicate with each other and they could have solved this. There didn't have to be a whole movie about it. But with horror films, I feel like that's different because it's just illogical. And it kept on, stayed on my mind. Like, why? Why did this have to happen? And I think that's what I really enjoy about horror films, is that you can't actually explain, at least the good ones. I feel like, you could try and you could come up with ideas of how it could have been prevented, but that's the horror is something you can't explain. And I think that's really interesting to look more and deeply into that.
Perfect. So my next question is, and I apologize that I don't have each one of your filmmaking histories committed to memory at this point. Is for any of you was this your first movie, or have you all made films before?
It's not my first film. I've made a
Okay.
few before.
Okay, so it sounds like you've all made films before. Have you always stuck with the horror genre, or is this a first time for you? Like, that's what I want to know is, like, have you always been making horror films, or is this something that you've always loved that you've decided you want to try?
My first short that I made back when I lived in Los Angeles was a horror comedy as well, and kind of like the way I would describe it, like the comp films were Fatal Attraction meets Scott Pilgrim versus the World. And so kind of I've always really loved playing with like genre and messing with that, but I have delved into, quieter horror as well with a film called Phantom Heart, and complete drama just with another short called Lavender. So I like to kind of expand my horizons every once in a while, stretch some muscles.
Yeah, and for me, my background actually is I'm a cinematographer. Like that's what I've been doing for my career, and um, I've never had the opportunity to shoot horror films. I've had one that was more sci-fi than horror, but I never really got to do it. And then a couple of years ago, I was just like, well, why am I waiting on somebody else to hire me to shoot for them? Why don't I try my hand at writing and directing? And so a couple of years ago, I made a short called Nightcap, and I loved the experience in doing it. And so kept the ball rolling, and that's what got me to making Locksmith as well.
I always pretty much stick to horror. I have done comedy, and I probably would go back to comedy, but I also think that those kind of genres are similar, that there's certain beats you have to hit for it to work. But I my last couple films have been horror, and I think it's really because when I was a kid and I watched The Ring in the theater with my friends, we were so scared. And then it got me on this horror binge because I wanted to just keep hitting that fear. And then I realized that nothing was really that scary anymore. And I was like, well, I want to scare that little girl that used to be me. So my goal is to please the girl that was scared of the rain and, Texas Chainsaw Massacre and whatnot. So, and I feel like I haven't really achieved that yet. So I am going to probably keep making horror films, but maybe like Cassie, switch it up and do a comedy just to stretch out the muscles because that's always a good idea. But yeah, my next ones are gonna. I'm editing one right now. It's another horror.
I think that's a kind of a beautiful way to approach this, to make the film that you want to see. Make the film that would have appealed to the young horror fan in you. So my next question is to all of you, especially those who have worked in other genres. What comes, does the genre come first? You just sit down like, I'm gonna make a horror film, or do you have an idea for a story first, and then do you try to tailor the genre to the story? Like, what's your creative process in terms of selecting horror as your preferred medium, especially with your current film?
Well, I did not write Lost Boys Pizza.
Hmm.
Came across the script in my screenwriting class. I moved to Chicago for my MFA at DePaul University, and in my first screenwriting class, one of my classmates had the script Lost Boys Pizza, and they were a writing MFA, and so I basically came up with a pitch deck and a sizzle reel and was like, please, please, please let me direct this vampire horror comedy. I really want to. So that, was how I kind of came to Lost Boys Pizza. But in terms of the process when I'm writing my own work, it's more like I think of like a log line and then kind of go from there, building out the world. And so I guess genre-ish comes first. Genre-ish and ideas then follow. But I like to kind of go with Jordan Peele's advice of when he was writing Get Out, which was follow the fun. So if I'm not having fun writing the horror idea, then I switch over to maybe the more traumedy idea or comedy or etc.
Yeah, I'd say I know that I want to make horror films, but I don't approach it, I guess, as looking at it as like I'm putting the genre first. It's more so when I'm coming up with an idea, is I try to think of a relatable situation that most people could have a shorthand with an audience, especially for a short film, and then what could be the scariest outcome of that situation. Because so for my film Locksmith is the basic premise of it is that it's a young woman getting ready for work in the morning, and a locksmith she's been waiting to show up for weeks to fix her lock shows up at the most inopportune time, and now suddenly she's let this complete stranger into her home, and he's creepy and seems like he has other intentions. So that's kind of where I start from, is just like I like taking things that are like everyday life situations and then making that creepy. Like how could it take a creepy turn?
Um, I'm just a bit of a horror nerd, so I think that any log line or story or a scenario I hear, I always somehow find a way to make it horrifying. I listen to a lot of scary stories. I've just got a massive morbid curiosity about like folklore and legends and serial killers and stuff because it's just something. It's a topic that I just find fascinating. um, I do a little bit of both. I mean, I there's of course like the idea is that I have a horror film. Maybe it's been done. Maybe it's about a witch or whatever. But like, what can I do to make it different or relevant to today? Or I just hear some completely random story. Maybe somebody had like a weird Craigslist job, or they're out in the woods, watching an empty building all night. Like, why? And that makes me think of a world like, well, what could be happening there? What could be in the woods? And that's the stuff that makes me feel like the writing is fun for me there. So I'll just keep on doing that until I get totally overwhelmed with it and then switch it up, I suppose. But Yeah, I'm here to stay.
All right. So as I said at the beginning of this, Ross, who has been doing this film festival for 30 years, has received more horror film submissions this year and is showing more horror films than he has in previous years. You're all young filmmakers. You all have your finger on the pulse to one way or another. Why do you think filmmakers are turning to horror more now than they might have had in the past? And this is kind of a bigger question. So, if you don't have the most thought out answer, that's perfectly fine. But at the same time, if one of the other panelists touches on something you want to run with, I want this to be a conversation. So let's kind of try to get to the bottom of why is horror blowing up right now so much?
I think people have found out that it's the best genre. That's like, no, my go-to answer. But I also think that it's fun to make. Also just in terms of a production standpoint, it's usually the cheapest to make. You know, low budget horror and going off of sort of Blumhouse tradition of if you can make it for cheap, do it. So I don't know. I think people have just kind of discovered, hey, I love horror. Horror is fun. Let's follow the fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think also the world is a very scary place right now. And, there's even more scary stories to tell. And I think that because of the modern landscape is, there's whole new like avenues or new ways to tell old stories of like, you're mentioning before about like, oh, someone said a movie about a witch, but if you take it into modern times or put a modern twist on it, I don't know, there's a different perspective to look on it, to look at things, and I think there's new avenues to tell it. And horror is the most fun as an audience member and as a filmmaker to do. Like the process of trying, speaking for myself, and I think a lot of others out there who make it, is like the process of making something with a mood and atmosphere in it, and then building suspense is, I feel like the challenge of that, and if you're able to do that, like, will improve your filmmaking skills across the board, no matter what it is. So I don't know, maybe I'm kind of getting on a soapbox about it, but and off topic. But I don't know. I just think that there's a lot of appealing elements to it that, as a filmmaker, those challenges, like the amount of effort you put into the challenge, when it pays off and works, is so much more rewarding. So I know for me, it's an addicting feeling to sit there with an audience and watch people jump when something happens in your movie. And once you experience that once, you're gonna be like, I want to do that again and again and again.
Yeah, I think people are attracted to horror because I think you could watch a bad horror and still have a good time. You can't say that about a lot of other genres. And maybe we like to feel a little alive because we're so close to death watching these films. I could tell you personally, I feel like I am really drawn to it because I've always liked whenever the final girl survives. Feel like there's a little feminism in there. I'm like, yes, she did it, you know. But I also think that, you know, my future and a lot of people's future is a little scary, like, Corey said. And I don't want to get too deep into it, because we know there's a lot of things that should be improving and it hasn't. And I want to explore that, people and their relationships. What makes people fall into a cult? What makes people, betray each other? Um, and I think just, we could do that in a drama, sure, but I think I'd rather see it in a, you know, ultra violent setting because I am numb to the news. So I need a little excitement.
So actually, a quote came to mind as you're all kind of just talking about the fun of horror, and and actually, Vanna specifically thought of it when you were talking about how even the bad horror films can just still be a lot of fun. There's a quote from Stephen King where he says the worst horror film he ever saw was fucking great, and I feel like that's kind of a nice mantra for the genre, where even when it's not necessarily firing on the way that you want it to, there's still something there that appeals to you. Also, Van, when you were talking, you kind of mentioned right at the end there that there's just a lot to be fearful of in this world. Do all three of you, do you ever feel like, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, that you're pulling from the world around you to scare people?
I guess for me, I think that I don't know. For me, I always view horror as like an escape, I think. Whereas you know, show me a film like Goodfellas and that actually terrifies me more. I think like kind of the more reality of humans and like humankind, and sort of seeing it play out in a straight like film compared to something that's maybe in the horror genre is a little bit more terrifying to me. So I feel like those people are the true masters of horror, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I that's the source for my films, is pulling from reality. Is, I mean, my previous film was about a couple on a first date after meeting off of a dating app and going back to the guy's place, you know, after the first date, and you know, just the reality of, like, for many years, like, you know, don't meet anyone you know off the internet. Don't go and meet up with strangers. And now we just have apps where, like, oh, you swipe and shows, you know, match with someone's picture and be like, oh, sure, I'll just go back to the stranger's home at someone I just met, you know, like, so yeah, I definitely like look at yeah, just reality of life and the scary situations that arise at any time.
I think so. I think it's consciously and subconsciously. I think, like, on a conscious level, I am hoping that I can make a movie that can change a toxic person's point of view. And maybe they see themselves in it, or you know, maybe they're being, like, my character Lurker, she's very hard on herself, and this kind of evil entity comes out. So it's sort of like, you know, bringing out her own inner demon out. And maybe somebody can watch that and go, wow, maybe I should be nice to myself. I was hoping I could watch that thinking I should be nicer to myself. But in another way though, like I hope to make characters who are super relatable and likable, but kind of can fight themselves, you know, defend themselves out of a bad situation. I think that's another reason why a lot of people like crime thrillers, right? Because they're thinking, if I watch how they get away, I can protect myself if I'm ever in this situation. Um, and then I think on a subconscious level, I think going back to like the state of the world, the news, you know, the people we have in power, it's all very disheartening. And so it makes me feel like you know, maybe like it is an escape, you know, for me to just be like, well, here's my fictional horror world, because, you know, this is how horror should be. Not like, you know, what it, you know, yeah, the world we live in. I mean, like the real horror, right, is our day-to-day lives and having to worry about feeding ourselves and paying the bills and whatnot. And I don't want to think about that. I want to think about getting away from a madman. That's more fun, because that's not really going to happen in my day, hopefully, right? But I think, yeah, I think I'm a little like nervous and stressed all the time. And so maybe when I write these things out, when I write through these characters, I can get away from it. I don't know. If I had a therapist, maybe that's what they would say.
All right, we got about just about 6 minutes left, so I'm going to ask one short question from each of you, and then we'll wrap up. So each one of you, your films are going to be showing very shortly at the Milwaukee Short Film Festival. If you could have it your way, and you could have your short show before any horror movie, what would you pick?
That's such a question.
I know. I can always skip you if you need a moment.
Yeah, I need a moment.
All right, Corey, do you have an answer? I know I just threw this at you, but you know, what's your gut reaction? What would you want your film to show before?
I gotta ponder that, because If it's trying to be thematically, like it would make sense as something that would play before it. I don't.
I think it's more interesting just for each one of you, just to like, what's the first movie that comes to mind when you think of your own movie?
I got it. Demon Knight.
Demon Knight. Okay. So for those listening at home, after you go and watch a Lost Boys Pizza, go watch Demon Knight. Vanna, Corey, either one of you got an answer?
I'll go just based the tone and atmosphere is The Strangers.
All right. So then after you go to the film festival and watch Locksmith, go watch The Strangers. And Vanna, finally.
I think there were two films, and one was called Hide and Seek, but I'm thinking of another one.
Okay.
And it was about a woman's imaginary friend.
Okay.
I wish
well,
I could tell you what that movie was. Yeah.
It sounds like one of the first student films I made. I know it's not because, oh my God, that was trash, but
Yeah, no,
sure?
it's a great concept though. It's really fun to explore. Yeah, I got to try it myself, I think, one of these days.
all right. Well, we don't have a title for that one, but if you, I don't know, there is a movie called Hide and Seek, so I wouldn't be surprised if that is it.
is. Shoot. Oh, I found it. The movie is called, it's Z, just the letter Z. And it's a bit weird. And I think it's like my film. Just a little weird.
Well, then after you watch Lurker, go and find the Canadian horror film Z, which I've not even heard of that one. So once again, I want to run through the films. Lost Boys Pizza by Cassie Llanas. That's going to be playing Saturday, September 7th at 7 p.m. We have Locksmith by Corey Benson Powers. That'll be Sunday, September 8th at 3 p.m. And then finally, we have Lurker by Savanna Wrobel, which will be playing Saturday, September 7th at 4:15 p.m. I want to thank you all for hanging out with me for 30 minutes talking about horror films, and I look forward to seeing every single one of these, and I look forward to seeing everyone who's listening to this come and hanging out at the Milwaukee Short Film Festival. We did it. This was fun. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for
thanks
doing
for
that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.